Hello, good people. It's Rob Lee. Fear and inaction are your enemy. You remember that. Fear and inaction are your enemy. Just as you have physical enemies, just as you have spiritual enemies, fear and inaction are your enemy. You need to be prepared, not scared. The sign says, beware of the dogs. Never mind the dogs. Beware of the owners. If nations or individuals are plotting suicidal courses, then you do not walk, join, or befriend them, right? You don't. If you see somebody's going to hell, they're going the wrong way, well, you don't. Let me slide in beside you and I'll go with you. Are you ready for version 2.0 of the Great Reset? You know, many folks need somebody to tell them when something's wrong. They don't use their own discernment. When you first heard about this great hoax 2 years ago, and you walked into the stores and seen that many of the items were gone or in short supply, and you started to see the prices rise, you knew then something was wrong. The question was, would this demonic genie go back into the bottle? The answer is no. I told folks 2 years ago it would never ever go back into the bottle. It was going to be there forever. Too much mileage was gained and too much was invested by the evil of this world. And one of the greatest hoaxes in history to capture the minds and money of the people. It is the Great Reset rerun, and we're getting ready to watch it again. Only this time we're going to get the far more dangerous version. And all chips are going to be placed in the middle of the table as the last hand is dealt. Yes, I said the last hand. To destroy a nation, you do it from within while pretending to be the friends of the people of that nation. You blame others for what you do as you work in the shadows. There are stages to conquering a nation. Number 1, destabilize. Number 2, radicalize. Number 3, hypnotize. Number 4, galvanize. Number 5, demoralize. Number 6, crisis. Underline crisis, because that's a big one. Number 7, normalize. When it becomes normal. The new change is normal. This is your new way of life, you see. Normalization. Now, where do you think we're currently at? How about 6.5, 6.6, 6.8, something like that, man? Somewhere in there. We're almost at the 7. And closing fast for these monsters believing they are God. I want to take you back in time as we continue to do this work that has been ordained by the Almighty Father Spirit. This is a 2-part series entitled The Great Reset Rerun, and part 1 is called Rerun, and part 2 will be Agenda and Finale. I want to take you back in time and give you a few historical facts as we go further, and I'm sure you'll start to understand. In 1913, the Federal Reserve was enacted in secret and illegally in December of 2013. There's nothing federal about it. It was done in secret, as most of the politicians who would have voted it down went home for Christmas vacation. You see, the folks were different then. Even some of the politicians were a little bit different. Every chairman of the Fed, every single one, has always been a member, a family member, mind you, of the synagogue of Satan. Nobody says anything. What if every member of the Fed would have been Chinese or Muslim? Do you think the people would have screamed, hey, something's wrong? But they don't mind that it's the synagogue of Satan. Of course, they don't refer to them as the synagogue of Satan. They call them God's chosen. That's not what God calls them. God calls them the accursed. 1914 and 1918, the First World War, created and funded by the central banks. Tens of millions of white people, killing tens of millions of white people. And a huge, great loss of wealth, which is key for Western nations. And this price was to be felt very soon in all white Western nations. Not only the loss of life, but the loss of money, the loss of income, the loss of resources. You understand? 1917 to 1924, the Bolshevik Revolution became what we know as communism, aka the Russian Revolution. Notice the timelines here now. Notice the timelines. It was from the children of Cain, with many atheist Russians joining in for scraps from the master's table. Nothing's changed, has it? It's still the same. They murdered Tsar Nicholas and his family, brutally murdered them, mind you. They burned down churches, starved people to death, and sent millions to die. And it was said the only time that a man and a woman could talk freely was in the wee hours of the morning as their heads were underneath of the covers. In 1924, the central banks destroyed the German economy and sent them into a depression 5 years before the United States. What this did was it paved a way for them to insert their pawn to take center stage a few years later in Adolf Hitler. You see, the Synagogue of Satan in 1924 was plotting. They actually was plotting it way before that, but things were really starting to come together now. They were plotting the return to the scene of the crime, World War II, as they were going to go back to Jerusalem, to where the greatest murder in the history of all mankind happened, the murder of their hated enemy, Jesus Christ. Now, because of the outrageous lies of World War II, they would now pose as the victims and not the atheistic antichrist criminals they actually are. The 1920s became known as the Roaring Twenties. It was a time of drinking, gambling, dancing, debauchery, good times, and having fun. It was to end abruptly. Just as Jesus said, as in the days of Noah, people were having a good time, they were raising hell, they were marrying, they were living it up, and then like a thief in the night, it came. Just like now, you're getting the folks, which brings us to the year 1929. But let me say something about right now. Notice the 1920s ended with abruptly. Kind of like now. 1929 was a year of evil, but before we visit the stock market crash that depressed the economy here in the United States and abroad, let's not forget what was going on in the Ukraine. The synagogue of Satan, who are the children of Cain, the children of the devil, were murdering and starving men, women, and even little children. They burnt down barns. While the wheat was in it, they confiscated food, and they murdered. And to this day, nobody says anything about it. It's covered up. There's a reason why. I take you to 1929 and what we call the Great Depression here at home. Now, like everything, there are many lies about this subject to deflect the truth away from the synagogue of Satan and teach the people a false narrative about what really happened. The Federal Reserve, the central banks, the synagogue of Satan set its sights on the big prize, the nation founded by fighters. Now, I loathe people that slam how this nation was founded and all the nonsense that goes with it. There was a guy who left a comment in the last video about Andrew Jackson, and I've heard people talk about Washington, Jefferson, all these people. Let me explain something to you. Many of you who say these asinine comments, you don't know how God works. You obviously have no relationship with the Most High to understand what was going on with these people called the Israelites and what had been prophesied and what my father said he was going to do with these people and for these people. These people came here because they were escaping Judaism. Catholicism was just the face. What was behind Catholicism was Judaism. That's why these people came here. God gave them this nation. Okay, I digress. In the United States in the year of 1929, the Fed deliberately depressed the economy by crashing the stock market. That's right. Deliberately. Millions went with no food and no employment. However, here's the catch. There was a surplus of goods. There was a surplus of food. The people didn't have money. They didn't have no jobs. But there was a surplus of everything, man. But guess what else they did not have? They did not have jobs. They did not have money. But guess what else they did not have? They did not have a warning. They had no idea. See, you and I are being warned. Get it? Now, how did the people overcome this tragedy that caused so much poverty, suffering, and hard times? Prayer. They prayed, and God heard their prayers. Now, think about today and the modern people. How many do you think will pray? I've preached about prayer many times. It is our words moving the hand of God to intervene. Let us continue. 1932 to 1933, maybe even into 34, just as the Depression was trying to end and Hitler was coming to power and paving the way for the Second World War and the return to the scene of the crime in Jerusalem, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who is we'll say he's a He's certainly a blood relative of the synagogue of Satan, but as I told you in a previous video, there's never been a 100% blood relative because it would be too obvious. He, along with the central banks, hijacked all the American gold here in the United States, depleting the Americans of their gold. You see, their resources were being stolen. This was in 1933 to 34. Now, who knows how much gold made its way overseas to vaults and eventually to the state of Israel after 1948. And who was the biggest supporter? The churches, then and now, carry the flag for the central banks. It's a hexagram. The Bible calls it the star of Renthan, Amos 5:26, meaning the devil. The churches and masses wave and swing the flag and shout, these are God's chosen people and this is their banner. How naive, blind, and delusional the world has become to believe the same people that God cursed forever and that Jesus Christ called the children of the damned devil can now be chosen. Chosen by whom? Maybe it's because they never read his perfect word, you know, the word called the Holy Scriptures, that so many say it's corrupt, it's tainted, or God didn't preserve his word. Sometimes, man, I feel like we are living in the Twilight Zone. I mean, to be around some of these people, man, sometimes it's really hard. This is why I try to avoid people. 1939 to 1945, we had World War II. An estimated 70 million white people killed by other white people. Are you getting it yet? More white-on-white crime. We hear about black-on-black crime. We don't hear about white-on-white crime because there's been hundreds of millions of white-on-white crime. 1946 to 1947, we had a time of prosperity in America. However, the fictitious Cold War between the United States and the Russian ideologies caused us, with the communism versus capitalism, it caused us to think that we had to go out and help the rest of the world to be free. They didn't want our intervention. This caused us to go into Korea in the 50s and Vietnam in the 60s, more bloodletting, more resources lost. However, the biggest change was the culture change from the late 50s through the 70s. You see, Americans and all white Western nations have become different people from the ancient white people of old. Even just 100 years before that, if you go back to 1850, those white people would not have recognized the white people of 1960. They just would not have known who are you people, man? Now, we were to have many more events that led us to the Great Reset, that is the ultimate move by the agents of evil for total control. A digital, cashless society that has one currency, and it will be kept on your card. And you can only receive your goods if you are a part and contribute to their society, if you go along. This is not the mark of the beast. When the mark of the beast is across your forehead and your hand, it has to do with your allegiance and your actions. By the time of the 80s, the cultural change in this country was in free fall. On September the 11th, 2001, Americans screamed, cheered, and cried. They wanted payback for those responsible for the tragedy of that day. Those responsible were still posing as God's chosen. Those responsible were the ones who filmed it. Those responsible were the ones who showed it to you day in and day out on the TV news. The people screamed and cheered as we bombed a few other nations. Patriot Acts 1 and 2 reduced the people to being slaves, and yet the people kept cheering and praising not God, no. Praising not Jesus, hell no. Who were they praising? His enemy. Amazing how the people praise God's enemies and at the same time ask God for help. God, can you help us? But I'm going to keep praising your enemy. Funny how that works, isn't it? To put God first is the way we are commanded to live. Jesus Christ told us, what's the first and greatest commandment? To love your Father with everything in you. With everything in you. That's the first and greatest, man. To love God above all. I mean, every part of you. That's number one. To put the family of God first is a virtue and not a crime. Not a crime. To love the way God made you and to life that he has ordained for you, it's not a crime. They want us to hate everything that God has made us, because they want to reinvent and redo and do away with us. So we have the Great Reset 2.0, and it's going to be heavy, man. But we are being warned, and we don't have to be scared. We just have to be prepared. I'm going to do this one more time, because in the last video I put this in, it was censored. Therefore, I'll say it again, but certainly will not make a habit out of it. And then I will close with my thoughts. I want to thank you who have reached out to me. You know who you are. I appreciate it very much. I had a brother tell me the other day that he prays now more because of our work. I cannot tell you how wonderful that makes me feel. When people tell me things like that, I cannot tell you, it makes it all worth it, because that's the goal. You see, I love praising my Father. I love praising Jesus Christ. I love trying to teach as best I can. I'm not very good at it, but I do the best that God gives me to work with. But I love it when people tell me they've gained from it. Thank you for helping this ministry to keep rolling. And there's some of you, you know who you are. You are responsible. You kept it going. I'll not have a Patreon account. I may do a PayPal. I'm not sure yet. They all seem incredibly evil, which is par for the course. What I'm looking for is a few folks that would contribute a little bit of something monthly. Not weekly, but monthly. My final thoughts. It is the greatest of crimes, folks, to help an enemy destroy one's people and nation. In everything that we've discussed, the culprits had inside people and forces helping them to destroy this nation. This is in stark contrast to the ancient white nations of yesteryear, who removed the enemy many times and did not flinch in doing so. If it meant they had to take the synagogue of Satan down to the Thames River in England and put them on boats and say, you don't have to go home, but you have to leave here, the people did it. People can no longer recognize their countries, and frankly, the masses are no longer able to identify with their ancestors who had such differing beliefs than the people of today. The godless shrink in fear of being called New Age names created by the devil's children. You're a racist, you're a homophobe, you're anti-Semite. And most folks do not even know what the word Semite is. It comes from the word Shem. The actual word is Shemite. It's idiotic on a scale, man, that every time I hear somebody say it, I just look and think, you have no clue what you're even talking about. But you parrot it because you have heard it and heard it and heard it, and you know no better. Let me say it again. Fear and inaction. Fear and inaction, while the biggest change in our history is taking place, is your enemy. The people are being scared into silence. The synagogue of Satan has suppressed the truth and spread the lie so they can create their narrative. This has enabled them to fool and bully the people into following suicidal courses, just as we're witnessing right now before our eyes. And God Almighty, and there ain't but one God now. Let me tell you something, brothers and sisters. One God, that's it. All the rest is a lie, man. Pretenders. There ain't but one Jesus, and he only has one name, Jesus. God watches all this play out, and yet hardly anyone has the spiritual insight to understand why this is happening and what can we really do. What can we really do? We'll talk about that more in part 2. In fact, we'll go deep into it, and we'll talk about the agenda and how I personally believe some of this is going to play out as we go further and what we really can do. If you've not seen our last few videos, please do so. There is knowledge to be garnered from them. Thank you for watching. I appreciate all of you. Thank you so much. Know that I love you, and I appreciate the friendship and the camaraderie that I've had with some of you, and it means a lot to me. You're the only friends I have. I don't associate with people. I don't go out. I don't look for friends. It's just not who I am. Thank you. And I'm going to make this a little shorter because with time constraints, I know some people between work and family, they like the videos to be between 15 to 20 minutes. Sometimes I can do videos for 30, 40, an hour long. I'll try to keep them to where you can watch them in one day. Get yourselves ready spiritually, physically, emotionally, and be prepared, not scared. May the Father bless you in the mighty name, the name that is above every name in heaven and in earth, the name that is exalted above every name in heaven and in earth, and the name that people don't even use, the name that the masses have come to hate and to shun because of the great power that it has. And that name is Jesus.